everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You guys know what I like to do on my show. I want to say it with me, enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And that's what we want to do today. We want to get you fired up about my guest. Today, I'll be spending time with Dennis Lines about his book, Consider Job, an inquiry concerning suffering, disbelief, and divine justice. So go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Hello, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining me today on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Angela.
Absolutely. Now, as is tradition around here, we always give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves to perhaps those few folks out there that may not be familiar with you or your work. So my first question to you is, what makes you you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was brought up by an industrial worker in Birmingham, the UK, and I had a formal education. I wasn't very bright at school, but I did well later on in life. I took an apprenticeship as a toolmaker in engineering, and then from there I decided to get myself further qualified, and I moved into teaching. I became a teacher of religious education in a large comprehensive school, and unfortunately during that time I suffered a spinal injury. I had an accident by falling down the stairs in my mother's house, and unfortunately I broke my neck, and I am now a tetraplegic. I was able to go back to work and teaching because I love teaching. I taught in a high school with adolescents, teenagers, and I formed good, positive relationships with them. But after the accident, I had to go to a spinal injury unit for rehabilitation, and they got me slowly walking again, and I maintained sufficient independence to get back into teaching, which I did until my retirement in 2011 at the age of 64.
Now, being an author, is that something that you have always wanted to do, or did you find that this was simply another means of sharing your knowledge with the masses?
No, I had no intentions of being an author. It was my spinal injury that made the difference. My major interest was in the restoration of British classic cars as an engineer. But at the school where I taught, we had a major problem in sniffing solvents and drug use, and I got personally involved with those students, and that opened a door for me. But when I had the spinal injury accident, I wanted to write about my psychological means of dealing with disability, which is what sparked off my first book.
Well, I do have a very great appreciation for a beautiful automobile, so I could see why you have a passion for that. Now, the title of your book, Consider Job, an inquiry concerning suffering, disbelief, and divine justice. Now, I want to make sure that I have a quick little side note here for our American listeners. When you go to find this book, the word inquiry is with an E and not an I, the way that it would be here in the States. So it's with an E and not with an I. Now, the title of your book, why did you feel that this was the appropriate way to title your book?
Right. I was not brought up as a Christian. I was brought up by parents who were not necessarily atheistic, but I went to a Sunday school and joined a church, and I began to accept the teachings of the church and particularly in its spiritual direction. I've always believed there was something extra as a dimension towards life, which drew me towards that area. Now, when I therefore joined a church, I got involved with running youth clubs and that sort of work, and that's what involved me in sort of always having an interest in young people and how to help them, particularly if they get caught up in drugs. And that's what caused me to write first about trying to give youngsters a spiritual dimension to their life.
Now, many of the authors that I have talked to have said that they present their book in a way that helps the reader along the journey, if you will. So my next question is, how should we properly read your book? Did you set it up in a way where we should read it from cover to cover, simply meaning page after page? Or perhaps is it more sections or chapter, read one chapter before moving on to the next? Or is it kind of reader's choice, where they're open to pick up the book and start anywhere that they like? What's your suggestion there?
I would first begin with the introduction to get a feel of where the direction of the book is taking one. And then it is possible to look at the first section in parts. You see, when I was in the church, and still am in the church, I spoke to a few members about how to interpret Scripture, and I was studying theology at the time, and they were saying to me things like, the biggest problem I have in my Christian walk is not so much how to interpret the Bible, how to make it relevant in my life. The problem is I can't always be certain, if I'm honest with myself, that I believe in God. Although I go to church and my family are involved in the church. And I started to think about that, particularly as a separate dimension of faith. Because faith doesn't make any sense without a contrast of doubt.
Right.
How do we help people who have doubt?
Now, do you think that perhaps your take on how to look at faith and how you have presented your book is in part because, one, you have an engineering background, or two, because you weren't raised necessarily in a Christian household, or perhaps a combination of both?
I don't know. It was just at the age of 12, back in the 1960s, early 60s, there wasn't that much to do as a teenager, and there was something I found that drew me towards this Sunday school and the church. It gave me something to do. But I wanted to help people. I always wanted to help young people, and that was the biggest thing that drew me into it. But when I was in the church, I felt many churches were not really appealing to young people, and so I was trying to bridge this. And when I read and spoke to a few people, it was a basic question: give me the evidence, give me the evidence, give me the evidence that God exists.
Right. Now let me ask you about the
It's because I've come into contact in my life with people in the church and people who are theologian lecturers who have wrestled with the one problem of suffering, innocent suffering.
My next question for you is related to the person of Job. There may be some people that are new to the faith and they don't know about Job yet. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened to Job? Who is this person that you're talking about? And why was it important for you to share his story?
Job is a character that appears in the Old Testament of the Bible. He's a man who's very wealthy, who suffers, and he's he suffers the loss of his 7 sons and 3 daughters and all his flocks of sheep. And he wants to speak with God to find out an answer as to why he has suffered. His wife tells him to curse God and then to die, and therefore he won't have to go through the hardship of suffering any further. But there's also another scene that occurs in which there is a heavenly court. It's as though there's like a play with 2 stages. And in the heavenly court, the Satan debates with God and God asks the Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him in all the earth, a righteous man, and has no blame. And then the Satan says, well, he's only that way because you bless him with lots of sheep and donkeys and camels. And therefore they enter into a bet. And they have the bet and said, if you take away those privileges from him, watch and see if he'll curse you. But of course Job doesn't. And then the next scene, when Job suffers the loss of all his flocks and his children, God then says to the Satan, there you are then, I've won that bet. But then the Satan says to Job, well, yeah, but you haven't struck him in the body. And then God says to the Satan, then do as you will, but spare his life. And that scene takes place, and he is struck with boils. He suffers terrible torment. And then he sits down, naked it says in the Bible, and he scrapes all the sores off his flesh. And 3 friends come to debate with him. Now they discuss all the reasons to why he's suffering. Has he sinned about God? Has he been unfaithful? And God says no, there's no blemish in him. And he doesn't get a satisfactory answer. So he wants to talk with God himself. And he calls on God for an audience. And towards the end of the book, Yahweh, the God of Israel, appears to him through the wonders of the natural world. He says, where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the deep? And he outlines all the marvellous things in the created universe and invites Job to just look at this vision in a hurricane. And then towards the end, God says to the three friends of Job, you have not answered correctly, whereas my servant Job has. And then Job is blessed because of his righteousness. And he offers sacrifices on behalf of his 3 friends. And then Job has twice the prosperity that he formerly had, and he has 3 more daughters and 7 sons. And the book closes at that point.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I know that there's someone sitting there listening going, oh my goodness, that is a story. How beautiful a story. Even though there is so much more that we can dig out of that. And I definitely want to talk to you more about that on the other side of the break. Speaking of break, it is time for us to take one now. But before we do, Dennis, can you please remind everyone, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And how do we stay in contact with you?
The title of the book is Concerning Job, an inquiry concerning suffering, disbelief and divine injustice. The book can be purchased from Amazon, the bookstore. And I am contacted through my website, which is called DaimlerPublishing.com.
Alrighty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this.
Discovery. No, just a sec.
What would it look like if we listened more? Could the right voice, the right set of words, bring us all just a little closer, get us to open up, even push us further. It could, if we took the time to listen. The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories. Download Audible and listen for a change.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for a Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. You guys know who I am, but my guest today is Dennis Lyons, and we are talking about his book, Consider Job, an inquiry concerning suffering, disbelief, and divine justice. Now, my next question for you, Dennis, is what type of feedback have you gotten concerning your book? Are people still intrigued by the story of Job?
Yes, they are, because it gives some kind of partial answer to people who suffer terrible things which are beyond their control. Things like, for some people, as Christians, have felt that God may have dealt them a bad hand, or members of my church, for example, had the birth of a child who was born with Down syndrome, and she found it very difficult to cope with her faith that was being challenged by experiences in life. And I wanted to address that topic through the example of the book of Job.
And I think many of our listeners can definitely relate as well. There have been so many women that have dealt with pregnancy issues or concerns, or even developing a terminal illness when you were trying to do something good in life, and look at what has happened. So you're right. I think people do the world over have to wrestle with issues dealing with mortality, or just the things going on in their world. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I want to kind of use that to wrap back around to your mentioning that you have been dealing with a spinal injury. Do you think that your life events have in any way helped you to form a particular view about the story concerning Job and how it can resonate with the world?
Yes, because I've been very sacrificial in my own life, in that I've given my life in my faith to young people, and I'm considerably considered in the communities where I live as a really good person, and my morals, my ethics, the Sermon on the Mount is something which I find extremely compelling. I live the Sermon on the Mount, and so I've had to wrestle with the fact that it doesn't seem fair for me, the outcome of having a spinal injury. I fell down the stairs because I had a blackout, and yet I've never blacked out in my life. It was just because I was working so hard in renovating a cottage, and it was just I run upstairs in the cool of the evening, hit the cold air, and fell down the stairs and broke my neck. And I had to wrestle with that psychologically. But also I was the school counsellor at the school where I taught, and I studied all the different branches of counselling, and I became the only male school counsellor, full-time school counsellor in a high school in Birmingham, UK. And it was there that I kind of had to wrestle with my own faith as to why have I suffered this spinal injury, and that was something that I had to deal with. And so I was coming to the book of Job to see what inspiration it could give me, and I found the story very, very insightful. So I wanted to explore this book through psychology, through literature, and through what other people have had to say about it, theologians and people who write about the biblical stories.
So do you think that your training, your education in psychology and in theology have helped you segue from where you were to where you are now?
Yes. I practiced as a rational emotive therapist, But then I was very much drawn to psychoanalysis, particularly in respect to Carl Jung, who is an immensely spiritual person, and his kind of theories of human behaviour and how we deal with things.
Now, you decided to take up theology as at the point in your life where you were retired. You were now at that stage where many people think of, oh, great, I finally get to kick back and relax a little bit and enjoy all of life. But instead, you chose to kind of become just as involved as you were previously. Why did you choose to take the theology route for this stage of your life, when you could have stayed in engineering perhaps, or done something even more with teaching? Why was theology important?
I think it was because it's almost an accident in a way, because I firstly had a motorcycle accident before my spinal injury, and I went to a local college, and I didn't fully have the qualifications to do a course to go into teaching. But anyway, because the principal wanted mature people who'd done something else other than high school and then going into teaching, they were impressed with the fact that I'd spent 12 years as an engineer, and they thought that that would be a practical thing to somebody having a wider breadth of knowledge in the world of work as opposed to just education. And they accepted me in the university. They asked what I'd like to do. I said perhaps mathematics or engineering. We don't do engineering, said the principal, and maths, you don't have the right qualifications. So I said, well, what can you offer me? Well, you can do theology, become an RE teacher. So that's what led me into it. And I said, okay, because I knew the Bible very, very well, but I wanted to actually understand the Bible rather than just learn it. And that's what drew me to become a religious education teacher in a secondary school, which I did for 24 years. And then I branched out into being a school counsellor. I also wrote about the spiritual dimension in counselling and psychotherapy. And so I've combined the two things, my understanding of psychology and also my understanding of the literature of the Bible.
Now, why do you feel that it is important that people understand the relevance of the Old Testament before moving on to the New Testament? For those who were raised in Christianity, we have been taught a little bit of both over the years, and you start to piece those pieces together as you grow and mature in your faith. But again, there may be someone listening who is new to Christianity, and they don't understand why people are still reading the Old Testament when salvation is found in the New Testament. Why is it important to do that?
I think to understand the New Testament, we need a context, and the context for the historical Jesus is found in the Old Testament. It's found in the nature of the fact that Jesus was brought up as a Jew. Everything about his life was Jewish. His parents took him to the synagogue at the appropriate age, and he, what we call today a bar mitzvah, but in their days he went to the temple. He was circumcised as a Jew. And we've got no reason to believe that he didn't take part in the Jewish festivals. It was indeed during the Passover that Jesus was crucified. So he went obviously to Jerusalem, which would be quite a distance from Galilee where he lived, and celebrated he planned to celebrate the festival, but events took over because the crowds really recognised him as being someone who they thought and hoped would deliver the country from the Roman Empire. The Old Testament is the story, the history of the Jewish people up until the beginning of the New Testament, which focuses primarily upon the Gospels and the development of the early Christian church.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I think that for people that are new, so many times as a mature Christian, we forget that every day there is being, someone is being introduced to the faith, and we shouldn't assume that people, know what we know. So thank you so much for taking the time to eloquently explain that. I love your answer there. So I want to shift gears just a little bit, and that is ask you some of those process questions. One of the main questions that I ask is about how you chose to publish your book. Every author has to determine if they're going to self-publish or if they're going to use the professionals or use a publishing house. Which way did you decide to go, and why did you choose that direction?
I wanted to self-publish because I felt that in a way I wanted to have more control of the market and try to produce a book that I wanted to do. And I wanted to have the book available much more in the United States because there's much more of a market in the United States where there isn't so much in the UK.
Oh, well, I'm glad I asked that question of you. That may help some of our international listeners out there to consider that as well. Well, Dennis Lyons, thank you so much for spending time with me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I have enjoyed my time with you, and thank you for sharing your book with us today. Now, before I let you go, can you remind us one last time, what is the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
The title of the book is Concerning Job, an inquiry concerning suffering, disbelief, and divine injustice. And it's available on Amazon and on Facebook.
Thank you again for being a guest on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela today. And listeners, thank you for spending time with us here as well. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to spend it with us today, and I thank you for doing so. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.